So I think we've all been at that moment where maybe we get bitten by that watch bug for the first time. And when you go back and look at just that first entry door into the world of watches for many people, I think there is a lot of just the same that you're going to be seeing from that first watch that get people into this world. I think is probably shared by many of us as we're kind of going about our journey and just kind of using that as a jumping off point. So in this video, we're going to be looking at that idea, looking at about a list of say 7 to 10 of the ultimate gateway watches that I think are responsible for being those first watches that get us into this world. So of course, I'm not gonna be able to mention every single watch in this kind of sphere. I will say also there's going to be just kind of more general speaking because you can mention so many within some of these lines. So just don't go too crazy on me, but love to see comments down below about what was your first watch that got you into this world. And before we jump into this video, 2 important updates. One is involving a new watch on TeddyBaldassarre.com with the Tissot PRX, the Powermatic 80 edition. So as soon as the quartz version came out, there was a lot of anticipation about this one, so definitely go check it out. I'll also be working on a video as well because I know there's a ton of demand around this piece. In addition, we also did just turn back on consultations. So if you have any question for a watch on our site that you're looking to purchase, fill out the form on the site to book a call. You'll actually be able to talk to a dedicated watch specialist. The people that are gonna be answering those calls have been in the industry for many years, working at say places like Omega Boutique, some of the top jewelers in the country. Really wanted to just offer a better customer service experience on the site. And then also something that just kind of, I would say more is a reflection of the experience that I like to try to create with the videos, which is I think more personal. And I think that personal touch online is also very important. So definitely take advantage of that if you have any questions, and don't be shy, definitely book a call. So to begin here, I'm going to start with looking at Timex. And there's probably quite a bit of different watches that you could mention here. In the last few years, I think the Marlin has been the watch that many people have just used as that gateway for them maybe getting into the world of automatics. But talking from a very general perspective, like the entry doors of just Timex in general, I think the Timex Weekender is probably the best entry door, maybe the easy reader, but for myself and actually my own journey, the Weekender was definitely a gateway watch for myself. I love the simple design of these pieces. The Indiglow is a fun, like just kind of treat with this. And when you're talking about prices, usually between like 30 to like 60 bucks on these things, depending on the strap option that you go for. They're incredibly versatile. They're of course very loud when they're ticking, and I think that almost makes them even more endearing. But I think the designs are very straightforward and I think very mass appealing. But this is for me very much the epitome of what I think of like entry-level Timex. And the Weekender, when I was getting involved and kind of getting into watches, I remember being in like college and I was like, all right, I'm a broke college student, I need to get something. The Timex Weekender was one of those watches for around 50 bucks. I think at the time it was maybe even 30 bucks when I purchased it. And I had that watch for quite some time. I did give it to somebody else to kind of start their watch journey, but that was an important watch in my just kind of progression into this world. So next up, we're gonna be looking at Seiko. No surprise, you're gonna see Seiko here, but in terms of what was the best representation of kind of that gateway into the world, if you're looking at their dive watches, there's plenty that you can look at. You could look at the Turtles, you can look at their Samurais, the Tunas, and things of that sort. But the best opportunity here, the best representation, I think, of a gateway watch is the SKX. It fits right in between the Prospects collection as well as those entry-level Seiko 5s. And then just the amount of enthusiasm around these pieces from all different fronts really allows this watch, I think, to be that gateway watch for Seiko. Nowadays, it's not as much the case, but I'm talking about it from like the last, 10, 20 years or so. The SKX has been a beloved model from Seiko. What we've seen from this model for so long, of course, the affordable prices was one thing. Also the variety of different options to go for if we're talking about the SKX 009, the 007, the 013, as well as some other different variations with the 011 with some more color. But the probably other thing that makes this watch such a great gateway is just its robustness and also the whole community that it created. There are just communities around this specific watch, and that is very rare. And I think it shows the enthusiasm people have and the affinity people have. I think much of that comes down to the fact that they can look back at this piece with a just kind of point of reverence and just remembering how they got into this in the first place. You could look at the modding community as well. There are people that will just take a bunch of SKXs and just make them all just customized in their own. You literally could just see people out there with just SKX collections. And I think if you're wanting a testament to a watch that can get somebody into it and keep them into it, the SKX has to be near the top of the list. Now next up we have G-Shock. And I think one of the first watches somebody hears about when they're getting into the world of watches for the first time is probably this term G-Shock. You can find them at a lot of traditional retailers. You look around and you just see them. And I even remember when I was like a teenager, just seeing kind of some cool, just muted color G-Shock with that 5600 case. That really is the G-Shock that was first printed into my brain. I wasn't the type of person that would gravitate towards them, but they just sit in a marketplace where they're perfect for, I would say, a younger type of consumer, or just somebody that wants to get that first watch. They don't have to worry about it. They can beat it around like crazy. It also, I think, just looks pretty cool. I mean, I think just the 5600 cases are very mass appealing in what they're going about. Wear that with kind of a nice athleisure look, and I think the DW 5600s look fantastic. These are also the most wearable G-Shocks. There are some G-Shocks that, of course, are going to get a little bit crazier as you start getting into some of the more complicated designs and different materials that they're using. So these resin cases, I think, just mass appealing. They have, of course, that entry door and just the ethos behind what the G-Shock represents. The construction of these pieces and the history behind these pieces and why they were created, I think, is so synonymous with the type of just person and thought process when somebody's looking for a watch for the first time. They want that ruggedness, can handle pretty much anything you throw at it, while also, of course, I think, looking pretty cool in the process. So next up, we have a watch that is very dear to my heart in kind of getting me into this world a bit more, especially with mechanical timepieces, and that is looking at Orient with the entire Bambino collection. You can basically put any single one that you want here as a great representation. Now, why the Bambino is so beloved, it's almost kind of like a meme in a way now, just because when everybody's saying like, hey, I have $200 to spend, I want a nice watch. I was looking at some fashion watches. I think everyone's like, oh, get the Orient Bambino, it's the best watch out there. Which, I mean, yes, in a lot of ways, it really is. In many ways, for like around $100, I think there's a reason why these are so popular. You're getting an in-house caliber, variety of different options to choose from, whether you're talking about Gen 3, looking a little bit more, I would say, minimalist in its style, going for like the Gen 5 that kind of has those Arabic numerals and looks a bit more, I would say, ritzy in its design. So many different options to choose from in this range. I remember I purchased a Generation 2 version 2 in the earlier stages of my journey. I think in the first video on this channel, maybe in the first watch ever appeared on this channel. It's just a cornerstone, I think, for so many people as they're starting to get into the world of mechanicals. When you can get a watch like this for around $100 to $200, given the just range in which you have at your disposal for options. That Gen 2 version 2 is a watch that I purchased for myself and I gave to somebody else. I gave to my brother, actually, and that was really what kind of spurred him along in regards to developing his own collection. Now he owns Seikos. I think he even owns a Rolex Datejust. He's kind of just went down this wormhole in terms of what he owns now. I think he owns a Tag as well, a Yunhan. So he's just kind of progressed ever since there. So I've seen it just firsthand how this has impacted people in my close circle, as well as people that I know that have maybe just watched the content over the years and just started there and now have just grown their collection. Orient Bambino, where it sits in value, what it sits for me sentimentally, this absolutely needs to be on this list. So next up, we have a watch that I'm actually wearing on my wrist right now, maybe not the perfect variant, that is the representative type of design that I would say is probably the most synonymous with the Gateway one, because I'm wearing the PVD black version of this, but the Hamilton Khaki Field mechanical. Now, when you're talking about entry-level Swiss-made watches from a mechanical perspective, I think this has to be one of the best watches out there on the market. No question. Now, if you're based in America, there's even more pulling to this brand, just given that this brand was based here for over 6 decades. So there's a lot to like in regards to just Hamilton and what they've been doing from a watchmaking perspective, and also their contributions to military field watch design. So you have all those things going for you, but then just looking on the surface of what this watch represents, for around $500, these are just great looking pieces that have great utility in regards to what they can take on, as well as versatility in kind of walking the line between dressy and casual. There's some that, of course, are gonna go a bit more casual, like the watch that I'm wearing on my wrist right now, but you also can go for maybe the more traditional black dial with the blasted case. I think the hand winding options are even more endearing, just partially because when somebody gets their first manual wound watch, it almost is more of a personal relationship that you can have with that watch compared to, say, even an automatic, because that just intimate moment where you have to wind your watch every single day, it's something that is very different and foreign compared to the typical world that we're living in. The fact that Think about, powering or maybe, your cell phone, you're plugging it into the wall. It's a type of activity that is kind of mindless. When you first have to just pause and like look at your watch for a second and actually wind that crown for the first time, I don't want to be too sappy about this, but that is just such a different type of just journey that you're going on, or different type of activity that you're doing compared to what we're kind of just thrown at day to day in our common world. And I know this watch is a bit more expensive compared to some of the other watches that we're probably going to be talking about, but I always find that when people buy this watch, it's kind of that watch is almost like that slippery slope, or maybe the start of something great, depending on how you want to look at it. But when you can kind of rationalize and see the greatness of this watch and what it's doing for $500, it starts to kind of snowball from there, and you start to find appreciation in other things. I think you kind of see the jump as well, compared to like, oh, what can I get for like $50 compared to $500? This is a great representation of a very well-made $500 watch, and I think it really just puts people in a perspective of maybe wanting to dig a little bit deeper after kind of checking this one off. So next up, we have the Vostok Amphibia. So I recently did a video of a particular Vostok where we kind of just dove into the details of this very goofy and quiche type of design, and also just overall ethos behind this brand. Very strange, but I get why so many people love these things. And the version that I had, that 12512, I just thought that was actually pretty solid looking watch, and I found myself wearing it a bit. But kind of just to rewind and kind of give a little bit of context here and why I think it should absolutely be included on this list. A lot of the same reasons why the SKX should be on this list. I think when somebody's looking for a robust type of dive watch, this is certainly in the range, and even cheaper. These are all pretty much under $100. Some of them for like 60, 70 bucks. You have really just quirky designs with things like the Scuba Dude and things of that sort. But I was actually on the street of, I was in New York City for probably about like a month ago, and I was just walking around, and somebody actually recognized me on the street. His name was Charlie. He was wearing like a Fordham shirt, so he's a college kid. Chatted with him for about like a minute, but I looked at what was on his wrist, and it was a Vostok Amphibia. And I don't know how far along he is in his journey, but he was a younger guy, and I just commonly see, like when you're looking at just the price perspective, as well as like the history, the kind of story behind the case construction and the engineering behind these pieces, these are fun watches to kind of get the ball moving. You also have the modding community the same way the SKX is with this, at an even more affordable price. There's just something about this kind of watch that I think you just feel more of a connection to, even like the friction fit bezels and like how that interaction and just rotation and your own wear of it will allow it to actually move more gracefully over time. I don't know if graceful is maybe the right word, but it starts moving a little bit more maybe effectively over time, like maybe it was intended to do. That all I think adds to the dynamic of this piece, and why it is, I think, very good representation of a gateway watch. So back in the early 1980s, the world of watches was much different. It was actually going through a lot of change. You might have heard of some type of period called the Quartz Crisis after the Seiko Astron was created in 1969. Swiss industry totally flipped upside down. What people perceived as maybe a luxury experience in terms of a watch was maybe more geared towards accuracy. But if there was one watch that kind of helped kind of reemerge the idea and maybe change the way that people even saw watches in general, was the Swatch. And Swatch, now we know them as a large conglomerate, but really where the kind of, I would say, representation or the familiarity that came in the marketplace from a mass market perspective was starting with these very simple, colorful designs from Swatch. And now you could see from probably in a modern perspective with the Swatch System 51s as maybe being the best from an enthusiast perspective, gateways into this world. I remember I was interviewing Jean-Claude Biver, and we talked about this idea of like just fashion brands and people who are at the front lines in regards to getting people into it. Because what I find very frequently is if you are not a top of mind consumer for this quarter, some of these luxury watch brands don't care about you. And I don't think that's a good idea when you're thinking about a 10 to 15 year stretch, especially when a lot of these people in this age demographic that are not being reached right now have no desire to own a watch, or are being just looking at their phone and saying, hey, I can tell the time here. You really have to tell that story, and I think it's so important. And that's why I think the Swatch and brands like this are incredible gateways into this world. You see these funky, colorful designs. You see the history behind these pieces and what they were able to represent. But getting back to Jean-Claude Biver, I remember we were talking about this, and just within arm's reach, a guy who pretty much has every single watch out there I could probably imagine, he still pulls in, this watch that he said, hey, here's a swatch that I have. And why I like these things is because they're fun. And whenever you can have something that's fun, it has an expression of individuality and what it's maybe putting off, and a variety of different options to choose from, that is something that is very powerful, and it teaches an idea that I think is the reason why so many of us get into this in the first place. It really is about individual expression. It's about something that is just kind of allowing you to kind of beat at your own drum, and also doing it in a more affordable perspective. The swatch really surmises a lot of these ideas, and certainly from a Swiss perspective is kind of that gateway door, I would say, from the most affordable point of view. So I know I can't get through this video without mentioning this. Let's just put it out there. The Seiko 5. Now the Seiko 5, in terms of what you could go for, I don't know if you've ever seen like just the amount of Seiko 5s that are out there on the market, but it is expansive to say the least. You could like probably pull up like an entire grid, and it's just like insane. Like thousands of Seiko 5s have been released over the years, but they're so beloved, and I think they are a point of affinity for so many people when they're looking back at the start of their journey, or maybe even as they're just continuing, because quite frankly, they are just fun watches to own and wear. Now, from the ones that I would say are probably the most commonly seen, or maybe the ones that are most responsible for getting people into the world, from the last few years, we've seen kind of the reemergence of the Seiko 5 Sports Collection, which I think are great. But for my time, and what was probably big for myself as well as other people I know when I was kind of getting into watches, were a lot of those kind of earlier Seiko 5 models with like the SNK 800 series, so the 803, 805, 807, and 809 being probably the most popular ones that I would see commonly. In the last 5 years as well, the SNKL 23 was also another model that I would see mentioned all the time. You also had the Seiko bottle caps, the sea urchins. There is just so much out here when you're talking about Seiko 5s, but what you usually could find these at, you could find them up for under $100, and then you're talking about from $100 to maybe $250, $300 for the range of all the Seiko 5s out there. There is just a ton, and I think when you're talking about, again, this individual element of expression and also just having fun in an affordable range, this has to be included on this list. And now to round out our list, this isn't necessarily just one watch, it's kind of just a collection of watches, and I just want to say kind of the Tissot Swissmatics. And why I'm bringing these up is because when somebody thinks of Swiss watches from, like, say that first Swiss watch, I think so many people go towards Tissot. And I think the numbers really back this up as being one of the #1 selling brands in the world from a mass market perspective when you're talking about Swiss-made watches. Tissot makes a lot of product and they sell a lot of product. And that is going to be a reflection of what people are getting into and continue to get into. Tissot is a kind of a mixed bag at times. They have a lot of watches that are going to be more in department stores and things of that sort, but if you are trying to get into your first maybe mechanical watch, I think the Swissmatic collection, there are quite a few that you could go for, are definitely some of the best entry doors. You could also look at the Powermatics and some of their other dress pieces like the Lilac or like the Visidate, for an example. Those can certainly be mentioned, but I think the more affordable Swissmatics are probably just great representations. They have clean looks, a variety of different styles to choose from, some of them of course being powered by that System 51 movement, so they're not seen in the same way as maybe the more just refined Powermatic 80 movements that you're gonna see out there. However, in terms of where they're going to be sitting in the marketplace, these are like that first, say, like Swiss watch. I think somebody, hey, I just need to get a Swiss watch, or like you hear about Switzerland making these really good products, and you're like, oh, I need to get something for the first time. I think a lot of people have been there before, and Tissot was that first jumping off point. It's maybe not gonna be the bread and butter of everything you do in the future, but when I just see now also what's happening with like the Tissot Gentleman, the PRXs, Tissot has such a good pulse on this just entry door into the world of Swiss watchmaking that I think they really do have a stranglehold on for many people that are getting into it. But all right, guys, that is my list of the ultimate gateway watches. I'd love to see comments down below. As I mentioned at the beginning, I could not mention every single watch, so please leave comments down below. Maybe give even some of your own just personal insights and story about how you got into this world. I'd love to see it, and I know other people would as well. If you did appreciate the video, thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. It's a great indicator for us as we continue to make more content. Also, definitely go over to teddybaldassarre.com. Definitely check out some of the new watches that we have for sale. And then in addition to that, definitely don't be shy for those consultations. We'd love to be able to chat with you. In addition, follow along on Instagram. I'll be posting some great photos of watches, and it's another great place to stay up to date with the content. But guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.